Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Modern Gnostic. My name is Brian Stanford. I'm a priest and bishop in the Gnostic Catholic Union and lead a modern Gnostic church here in Asheville, North Carolina called St. Moses the Black Sacramental Mission. Today we're going to continue on Modern Gnostic with our series Rambling on Gnosticism, and what I'm going to attempt to talk about today is the apostolic and ecclesiastical history of the modern Gnostic church. A lot of the videos that I've been trying to do at Modern Gnostic have been meant to be understandable and have appeal to anyone who might search out and look to find information on Gnosticism. This video is going to be a little bit different. Hopefully it will be interesting to everybody, but it's going to be a bit nerdy, getting down into the details of things, or probably in this video just beginning to scratch the surface of things. So here we go. We've recently in the Gnostic Catholic Union been restructuring the formation of our church, looking at our foundational theology, what it means to be a modern Gnostic church, what it means to have priests and bishops and deacons, to celebrate the Holy Eucharist, to have the traditional sacraments of Catholic Christianity. And part of this is what is called Apostolic Succession. Now, if you're a Roman Catholic, or if you have a background in Catholicism or the Episcopal Church or the Orthodox Church, you've probably heard the term Apostolic Succession. For the rest of the people watching this video, very briefly, Apostolic Succession is the idea that starting with the original apostles of Christ, starting with Peter, that there was a transmission of the apostolic blessing and empowerment coming from Christ to Peter, and then down through time, through tradition, to modern people living today. The way apostolic succession works is that generally a bishop who is in the line of apostolic succession lays hands on the person that they are transmitting this to, creating new priests and bishops, deacons. This is known as the sacrament of holy orders. And so when we say apostolic succession, what we're talking about is a spiritual lineage that's tracing back to Christ. Now, immediately, this raises questions. And if you look at apostolic histories, what you'll see is long lines of lists of so-and-so, consecrated so-and-so, consecrated so-and-so, consecrated so-and-so, consecrated Bishop Brian. And a lot of people in the Gnostic church world like to collect these lists and lines of apostolic succession, but it's not unique to us. This is something I saw very much in Vajrayana Buddhism, saw also in esoteric Hinduism, is the line of masters, the line of initiation from you to your teacher, to their teacher, to their teacher, to their teacher, to their teacher, tracing back to the source. Now, as far as I'm concerned, what is important here is not so much the modern sense of historical accuracy in, is this stuff quote unquote real? I think the important thing that's being talked about in apostolic succession, particularly from the perspective of modern Gnosticism, is that this is a capital M mythic concept of a line of transmission and empowerment tracing back to source. It's a stream of esoteric mythic current that we step into and make real into the world. So what does it mean to say that modern Gnostics have a Catholic apostolic succession? So I'm going to spend the next five or 7 minutes trying to explain this. The history of the modern Gnostic church really starts in 1890 with a man named Douanel in France, who through a series of spiritual practices had an experience of Christ and 3 Bogomil bishops coming to him in a vision and empowering him to reestablish the Gnostic church. Now, Douanel considered that he was reestablishing 3 or 4 really unique things in this. The first was the primary importance of the divine feminine in the current of the Western tradition. So Dwanell saw the reestablishment of the Gnostic Church as being something that is going to bring forward the divine feminine aspects into the religion of the West. It would be a whole other video to talk about how in the Western tradition we had a concept of the divine feminine that has been watered down and ignored and at times suppressed throughout history. And so Dwanell saw his empowerment to reestablish the Gnostic Church as a reestablishment of the divine feminine in the Western tradition. The second thing that Dwanell considered that he was reestablishing was Valentinian Gnosticism. Now, again, it would take a whole other video to talk about what Valentinian Gnosticism is, but it's something you can look up online, you can read about it. It's something that Valentinian Gnostic, basically there were multiple schools of Gnosticism, probably never calling themselves Gnostic, and there was a man named Valentinus who is considered now to be the head of the Valentinian school of Gnosticism. He was a student of a man who sat at the feet of the Apostle Paul. So that's how early these things trace back to. And Valentinian Gnosticism, much like modern Gnosticism, engaged in the sacramental practices of the Catholic Church. Valentinian Gnostics attended church, they were baptized, they celebrated confirmation, they celebrated the Eucharist. All of the sacraments were there in Valentinian Gnosticism, along with ideas about the path of Christianity, the way to salvation, not being solely one of belief, but being one of internal revelation and liberating experience. So Dwanell saw his movement as the reestablishing of Valentinian Gnosticism. A third thing that Dwanell considered himself to be reestablishing was the sacraments to the Gnostic Church. And this is really important, particularly in the work of our church here in Asheville and in the larger Gnostic Catholic Union, and in modern Gnosticism in general, is a recognition that the sacraments of the traditional Catholic Church are means by which we can interact with the divine hierarchies and engage in ritual that causes inner transformation on the path to liberation. So Dwanell saw a modern Gnostic church as reinvigorating and re-engaging with the sacraments. And the fourth thing that Dwanell considered himself to be reestablishing was the significance of Gnostic symbolism. And again, this is another thing that would take a whole video to talk about, but basically in modern Gnosticism, one of the things that we're doing is re-engaging with this ancient symbol set of early Christianity, of early Christian mysticism and theurgy and inner transformation. And Dwanell saw this as the movement of the modern Gnostic Church. So from 1890 until 1913, Dwanell was establishing the Gnostic Catholic Church in France. In 1913, Dwanell's church was joined with traditional Catholic Apostolic Succession through a Syrian Orthodox bishop. And what this brought in, we have the esoteric lines of Dwanell, the lines of initiation through vision, and then connected to that was the Catholic apostolic lines going back to St. Peter and bringing in this traditional form of Catholicism, particularly the validity of our sacramental practice. Now, most modern churches, and particularly the Gnostic Catholic Union, carry both of these lines of apostolic succession. So we have the esoteric lines coming from Dwanell, and we have the apostolic lines coming through the man's name was Velate, I think is how you pronounce it. And these were lines through the Syrian Orthodox Church. And we manifest both of these today in our modern Gnostic endeavors. What this basically means is that we're joining two lines of spiritual initiation and power into one organization and bringing those forward. So we have the esoteric tradition of the French Gnostics and the English Gnostics that runs through Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, particularly Martinism. Another idea of Dwanell is that Gnosticism was the true secret religion of Masonry and of esoteric Masonry and of Martinism. These were fraternal societies, fraternal occult societies in England and France that carried on a tradition of Western mysticism and theurgy at times when these things were heavily suppressed in Western culture. They survived in these fraternal organizations and blossomed forth again in 1890 with the reestablishment of the Gnostic Church. Another interesting thing about Dwanell's early church is that a lot of scholars think that this was probably the first time in history that you had a self-identifying Gnostic church. As I mentioned earlier with the Valentinians and other Gnostic sects, these people probably did not identify themselves as Gnostic. This is a later label that has been added on, but Dwanell and people in Dwanell's line of initiation after him very consciously identified as Gnostics, as we do today, consciously identify as Gnostics. So there's that side of things. And then the apostolic side of things is the priesthood, bishops, deacons, baptism, confirmation, the Holy Eucharist, all of these things that we practice on our esoteric path. And oddly, these things are considered valid yet irregular or illegal from the perspective of the Roman Catholic hierarchies or the Orthodox hierarchies. So what that means is that our priests and bishops, our consecrations and the sacraments that we practice and our lines of apostolic succession are recognized as valid, but since we're practicing them outside of the confines of what is seen as orthodoxy, they're considered illicit. But in the modern Gnostic movement, we try not to get too hung up on that. I try not to get too hung up on that. I'm not really trying to recreate what Rome's doing or what the Orthodox Church is doing. We're trying to create something completely new. And something I think that's really important to recognize is that in a lot of ways, some of the most beautiful things in our spiritual heritage as Western people has been co-opted and stolen and bastardized in so many disturbing and disgusting ways. And one of the things that we see in these early founders of our Gnostic movement is an attempt to regain our identification and our place in this Catholic history. So I can see my timer. I'm about 13 minutes, which is kind of long for what I want to do on a video. I know a lot of this is probably rambling and disjointed. I'll provide links at the bottom of the YouTube video for people who are interested in finding out more information about this. And we'll make a video next week going a little bit deeper. But just to recap the main points, what we're doing in this modern Gnostic movement is bringing forth both this tradition of ancient Christianity that goes back to the early apostles and to Christ in this mythic line of connection. And we're also bringing forward this esoteric heritage of the Western tradition of Hermeticism and Kabbalah and esoteric Masonry and Martinism. And the flowering that we see today is the flowering of modern Gnosticism. So I hope this video confused you. I hope it made you curious. I hope it informed you about some things and has gotten a taste in your mouth for seeking the mysteries. If you're in Asheville or if you're in the surrounding area and you are interested in participating in a modern Gnostic sacramental church, you can find links to our church in the show notes. And until next time, as always, I ask that the Holy Spirit lead you from darkness into light, from ignorance into gnosis, and from death into immortality.